I'm not CIA, but I'm sure some of you might be. Maybe not some of you chatting, but definitely some of you watching are. Absolutely. I'm not, though. We've established this. We've established that I'm not. But so not only have, of course, they've infiltrated all these left-wing movements, but that's the thing we were talking about the other day as well, is that they've also infiltrated these right-wing movements. And every single one of the Proud Boys, every single one of these like modern right-wing movements as well have absolutely been infiltrated by the feds also. I mean, how many more times do we have to hear about these right-wing guys that are federal informants? It seems to happen every single prominent person that gets to this point. They've got their fingers in all this shit, including QAnon. I probably should have changed the title a while ago. I'm bad at that. Like we've pretty much established that QAnon is like a Fed thing. And when I say that, that doesn't mean that every single person that believes in it is a Fed. But who spread it? Ask yourself, who benefits, right? Who benefits? Who spread this? Where did this original stuff come from? Well, one of the Pizzagate. Remember, that's what Pizzagate was, the beginning of all this stuff. It kind of morphed into QAnon. Who are the primary spreaders of Pizzagate? Jack Posobiec, who is formerly Naval Intelligence. Jack Posobiec, who knows Roger Stone and is a Roger Stone protege. Jack Posobiec, who's pretty much an open Nazi, but who knows if that's what he actually believes or if he's just kind of infiltrated this community. He could just be a boring Nazi that got flipped. But I mean, he does have a background in naval intelligence. Roger Stone, Alex Jones. This rumor was spread by people with credible links to these intelligence communities. And as part of this strategy of like flooding all this misinformation mixed with truth, because as we know, the ruling class of the United States engaging in fucked up shit like child trafficking and quite possibly ritualistic weird shit. I believe that is stuff that happens. But then it gets spread by like people like Jack Posobiec and Alex Jones and all these weirdos, and all of a sudden it kind of loses anyone that, as we've talked about many times before, anyone that starts actually asking about this kind of thing ends up looking like kind of a lunatic, or you look like one of these psychotic right-wing guys. Thank you, Naye Bird. I've gotten a lot of good comments on the hat. Thank you, everybody. So that's kind of my point, is that not only does... I'm sure the feds have infiltrated all these like new left movements, but they're absolutely infiltrating all these right-wing movements as well. And that leads me to kind of what I wanted to talk about today, which is there was a segment on Tucker Carlson, I believe last night. Glenn Greenwald is defending it. I wanted to take a look at it because it's where Tucker Carlson talks about the links between the feds and this January 6th riot. And listen, I don't like Tucker Carlson. Okay, he's a fascist, and let's just get that out of the way. But I also saw people kind of intrinsically pushing back on this, and I'm not so sure that should be the approach. Let me find this, because listen, if the feds have a hand in QAnon, which I don't think it should even be that much of a controversy or a conspiracy to suggest that they do. We know that they had infiltrated all these movements on January 6th, right? For this Capital Riot. We know there was a bunch of weird shit that happened that day about cops leaving entrances open, How did this like protest, how did they actually breach the Capitol and get into the Capitol building? That's been kind of a mystery. I agree with everything everyone is saying about Tucker Carlson. I'm never going to be like well, you got to give it to him at this point, person. But all this stuff, all these kind of weird coincidences that had to happen in order to allow this riot to get past the gates, because we've seen before when Black Lives Matter protesters were marching in Washington, these buildings are militarized, and like if they don't want people to breach these barricades and get into the Capitol building, they won't let them. Like they've got a fucking army, right? So somehow this January 6th riot was allowed to breach the actual Capitol, which led to a woman getting shot by Capitol Police. And when you look at things like, for instance, the JFK assassination, when you look at things like September 11th, you often see these kinds of weird coincidences start to pop up, where certain things that never would have been allowed to happen were seemingly allowed to happen. Like the fucking Mr. X again in JFK. You would have felt a militarized presence on the street that day. Why were they asked to stand down? Why? Why did he get sent to fucking Antarctica when he normally would have been in charge of JFK's security? Why weren't they allowed to scramble fighter jets on September 11th? It's the most fucking well-funded advanced military in the entire world. For some reason, they just couldn't do this. Why were these hijackers allowed to fucking get on planes when the FBI knew all these guys were in the country? They knew something was going to happen. They literally knew Obama was about to attack the country. Fucking talk about a Freudian slip. They really knew that Osama bin Laden was determined to attack America. They had a fucking memo that was written that clearly outlined this, and it did happen. Not to get too far down that rabbit hole, but I'm just using as an example of some of these big historical, talk about an inflection point, by the way, 9/11. We've talked about that, how things went in a different direction after that. But there's weird coincidence about that. And I think you can look at this January 6th riot and point out some of these things as well. I personally think they did shoot down the plane that crashed. I mean, I guess that's possible. I mean, I think it's plausible, the story that happened with United 93. Like did you ever see the movie United 93, the Paul Greengrass movie? It's actually quite good. I never expected it to be very good, but it's actually pretty good. But it absolutely could have been. It could have been shot down. I wouldn't discount that. I guess that's kind of my main thing, is that the main thing that I think when we talk about that particular incident is not the stuff about like holograms or the Pentagon or your United 93 and all these things, but just like, was it allowed to happen or wasn't it? Did someone allow this thing to happen, and did they then use that to their own benefit? Which we all know, of course, they did. I always assumed it was a propaganda piece. Honestly, it's just a well done movie. It's very good, and it's actually like more. It's actually quite humanizing to the hijackers in an interesting way. Allowing it and orchestrating it are two different things. And then you get into like, how many more links do you need before it qualifies as being orchestrated? When you fund and train those guys in the 80s, obviously they have intelligence connections already, and then they end up carrying out an attack which seemingly is allowed to happen. It's not that hard to make the next jump to be like there was further communication between these groups before this event. Nevertheless, I think there's a few of these situations from January 6th that remind me of the same thing. And I do think, even though the main story of Donald Trump, as we've pointed out many times on the stream before, we watched January 6th happen live on this stream. And the very simple story of Donald Trump intentionally riling people up and intentionally telling people they're stealing the election, they're stealing democracy, you need to like fight for democracy and all this shit, all the election conspiracy theories and all that shit. that obviously did, regardless of whether the FBI or the CIA was involved in any of these right-wing movements, that did have an effect of just like motivating people to get all riled up and go to Washington. My question is, what level of infiltration did these feds have with planning these events? We're doing 9/11 conspiracy theories. No, we're not. I'm just using 9/11 as an example, and I'm talking about January 6th and some of the interesting sort of connections that are there. So yeah, number one, Trump got his like psychotic fan base all riled up and told them that they were stealing the election. There was a bunch of people that just naturally got involved with that. But if you take a look at the ways that the feds are almost certainly involved in QAnon, the feds had infiltrated all these movements. There was many like Air Force and military people involved in these riots. These riots were allowed to breach the Capitol. Like, come on. If the Capitol Police and the people in Washington didn't want the Capitol to be breached, then it wouldn't be. They've got a whole fucking army. Like I said, if it was Black Lives Matter protesters, if it was Antifa, anarchists, anybody that posed like they didn't want threatening the Capitol, they wouldn't have happened. So I do think that this riot, which they knew was happening, they knew Donald Trump was creating it, they were possibly adding kindling to that fire online as well. And I do think that they allowed this riot to breach the Capitol and create the big event that we all saw. And by the way, it's also disturbing that like so much of the footage of that incident has been taken offline. Isn't that weird? Like, I remember I was streaming that whole day. I uploaded my whole stream to YouTube because I wanted to preserve this, because it was like we were watching this amazing historical moment take place. I wanted to preserve this, and YouTube took it off. They said I was promoting this conspiracy, and I was like, no, I'm literally just covering it. I don't believe in the conspiracy. This is just my coverage of the event. And they were like, no, it's deleted. You can never get that back. So now I've lost that footage forever of the stream from that day. So that's the kind of thing. I do think there is kind of a conspiracy here. The question you have to ask is why? Did the intelligence community let 9/11 and 1/6 happen on purpose? And I'm going to say yes. I do think that both of these things were allowed to happen. And because that's the thing. At first I was thinking possibly this was because of right-wing elements that are in like the Capitol Police and like in the sort of police infrastructure that sympathized with the riot and wanted to overthrow the government and wanted to string up Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi and all that stuff. And that's why they were allowed to breach the Capitol. I also think there's a possibility, though, that because, as we know, Trump was kind of at war with the intelligence community the whole time that he was the president. And that doesn't mean that I think Trump was good or in the right. Like, Trump's a fascist. This is not like the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. Like, this was like a let them fight situation for me. Like, the intelligence community and Trump and the Trump movement are both my enemies as far as I'm concerned. But nevertheless, that doesn't change the fact that Trump really was warring with these people. And they tried to destroy Trump as much as they could with the FBI and Comey and the Russia investigation, and them talk about the media, the way that the media laundered that Russia investigation and got everyone fired up about that. There was like an information war going on during the Trump administration between the intelligence community, or the deep state, as Trump always talked about. He wasn't just making that shit up. There really is a deep state in the United States. It's the national intelligence, the national security establishment, the intelligence community. So yeah, even though you're right, he was friendly with this, he put his people in place in some of these institutions like Pompeo. But there's certainly an element within these institutions that were engaged in a kind of protracted information war with Trump during this period to try and limit his ability to, because he ran on not anti-imperialist, but he ran on a very like against these wars and against these the American foreign policy. Like he talked about it. Remember, like, we're killers. Remember that the Putin quote? We got killers. He ran on this kind of thing. So I think in a way that he was kind of a threat to these people, and that's why this back and forth was happening with Trump and the intelligence community.
And have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Strin, thank you. I'm glad you joined the stream. I'm happy to hear that someone pointed you in this direction, and I'm glad that this conspiracy talk has been appealing to you. Sometimes the 9/11 stuff really turns people off. So that's the background. So the question is, why? With January 6th, who allowed it to happen, and who benefits? Who benefits? That's what you have to ask yourself. You know, man, Lenin, you know what Lenin said? You look to the person that will benefit, and, you know what I'm trying to say. You know? So that's the question. At first, I thought this was maybe because of right-wing infiltration of these police institutions, which we know there's been plenty of that. We know that many of these police forces and intelligence community guys are right-wing psychopaths indeed. But I do also believe there's a possibility.
And have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Stream baby almost due.
Thank you for the 8 months of Prime Bucks, Lodane, and thank you for everything you do. Can we get a Lodane emote going in the chat, please? Thank you, Lodane. So the question is, why was this riot allowed to breach the Capitol? And considering what happened afterward, the way that, you know, they impeached Trump again, they used this to get Trump kicked off of social media. We know these social media tech companies have ties with the intelligence community as well. This was used to kind of neutralize Trump, to get him out of there, to take away his ability to communicate with people. And again, please, if you're watching this is not a defense of Trump. I don't like Trump. Trump is orange man indeed, bad. I agree with this. Again, it's not an enemy of my enemy is my friend thing. But I do think there is a possibility that the intelligence community, if not orchestrated this January 6th riot, absolutely did allow it to progress the way it did in an effort to kind of neutralize Trump. I don't think you can call that a conspiracy theory, but I do think it's a possibility. Again, we know that the feds have infiltrated all these communities. We know that QAnon, if not originating with the intelligence community, was encouraged by the intelligence community and with people with connections to the intelligence community. We know this. And I have a feeling a lot of these mass shooters are also domestic gladio operations. No proof, just a hunch. Well, this is like the way these places operate, right? Because many of them are not. You have a country that's filled with millions and millions of guns, which are extremely easy to get a hold of. It's filled with fucking inequality and mentally unhinged people that have been brainwashed by decades of the most powerful propaganda system ever devised by man. So naturally, out of that, there's so much misery, there's so much inequality. Naturally, out of that, there's just going to be mass shootings that happen. I think it's like a natural outcome of what American society is. But are some of them orchestrated? What do we know about? We don't know anything about the Las Vegas shooting. We know nothing about that. The largest mass shooting in the history of the United States. Conveniently, there hasn't been a big investigation into that. I have not heard a lot of information about the motivations of the Las Vegas shooter. I can't remember his name or who this guy was or who was involved with. Stephen Paddock, yeah, thank you. Like, you can't... You don't think they know? You don't think they've looked at, he was an MK Ultra, he was arms dealer for the CIA. So he's something. Come on. That's one of those ones that it's like, come on, guys. Yeah, or Porta Peak. I mean, the coal mine's a good example. I mean, he had connections with the RCMP. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that the RCMP was directly involved in that shooting. And again, it's another thing. We just don't hear much about it. We just don't hear much about this RCMP-affiliated man who went on a fucking 13-hour murder spree. FBI finds no motive in Las Vegas shooting, closes investigation. Come on. Let's get real here. So this is my question about January 6th. And please no one take this as being a defense of Trump in any way. Anyone that's heard me talk about this, again, he's a fucking fascist. He's openly racist. This is not a defense of Trump in any way. But I do think, though, there is a strong possibility that the January 6th riot was allowed to progress the way that it did, because, as Red Scary pointed out a few minutes ago, it literally neutralized Trump as an independent political force in the US. It did. If that had not happened, imagine if Trump was still on Twitter every single day, doing those Trump tweets that we all ate up like hogs. If he had been on Twitter every single day for the last 100 days, pointing out, roasting Biden, pointing out all this shit, he would be easily the favorite to probably run and defeat Biden in 24. And he still might be. Even that's a testament to how popular he is in the conservative movement. He still may be that person. But it's extremely... The January 6th riot really, really limited his ability to create these big political movements. And we know that he was a threat to these intelligence community guys to a certain level, to a certain extent. Never that much of a threat that they needed to go to they needed to take out the heart attack gun. But we know that he was kind of in a war with these people, with the deep state. I mean, he talked about it often. It didn't at all. Just because he's not on Twitter doesn't mean he's immobilized. Facebook just said he'll be back in time for the next election. Yeah, no, that's true, crackety crackin', and that's what I mean. He still might be. He's still very popular in the conservative movement. But even he did a big speech the other day. It didn't really make as much of a splash. It did also, there was a lot of normies that were watching that January 6th shit play out that were completely turned off from him from that point on as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's making him stronger. I'm not sure about that. Maybe you're right, but I'm not so sure. I think he has been diminished a lot. Although we'll see what happens in 24. My point is, though, when it comes to this January 6th riot, it was allowed to happen. Okay, it's not was it not? It was allowed to happen. It was allowed to progress to that point. It was they allowed that riot to breach the Capitol. I 100% believe this. The question is why. Were there elements that really did want to overthrow the government and install this kind of new fucking Trump-led fascist movement? Maybe. What I think is that as much as I hate Trump, I think it's possible that these intelligence community types, who I also hate, wanted to take him off the chessboard and didn't want to do anything too drastic, but wanted to make raise enough of a stink that he would be kind of neutralized. And I guess you can disagree about to what extent he has been neutralized. I think it has made a big impact on his ability to create these big movements. Yeah, my sister was turned off Trump because of January 6th. Yeah, I think a lot of people are like that. And yeah, they wanted to get a security bill passed as well. They get that's a little side bonus. Is that after a whole year of defund the police and this big movement, they're we get a nice couple more $1 billion to, spy on Antifa. Can someone just please post someone in my opinion, that's the primary motivation. Maybe. It's kind of a twofer. It's kind of a two birds with one stone thing. You hurt Trump, you get him stopping Trump's rocking the apple cart. Even if Trump was never really at war with these deep state guys to the real extent that we imagine, he was also just embarrassing for them. He was embarrassing for the ruling class of America because he was always, what did we always say about Trump? Where he's always saying the quiet part out loud. It's not even that he's going against their plans. He's doing everything that they wanted, but he's such a fucking buffoon that he's openly saying what they're doing instead of like being the smiling nice guy, what the American president is supposed to be. Like, the American president is supposed to be a figurehead, a smiling, harmless guy that's kind of managing expectations downward for everyone, that's maintaining this facade of America being the global good guy. That's the American president's role, right? He's the PR, the front man for this big kind of organization. And Trump was humiliating for them. He was always just like putting his foot in his mouth and saying, yeah, we're doing this evil thing because it's evil and we agree with that. That's why he was a threat to them, not because he was going against anything that they were doing, but because he was openly talking about it. And he was openly like showing everyone, even though if you're smart, you should know this already. He was showing everyone like it was like a veil dropping moment. It was like, he's just the face of America, like the face that America always was, but Trump is like showing everyone what it really means. My socialist friend turned FBI because of January 6th. I'm not kidding. Well, that's it. I mean, a lot of people on the left, including me, have been pointing out like the fact that this was a dangerous situation, the fact that many of these right-wing lunatics like did mean to do significant harm to people. And for some, as I never went as far as like, and that means we need to empower the intelligence community to explore this. I never said that because I know how fucking dangerous these people are. But I think a lot of people probably did be like, yeah, we need the FBI to investigate these movements. Their figurehead made them look incompetent and foolish. The innuendo, that's a really good way of putting it. So it's not even that he was going against what they were doing. He was doing everything that they wanted, but he's just such a fucking dunce that he's giving up the story. He's telling everyone what's going on. That's what they can't have, right? And that's why they were always trying to undermine him through the Mueller report, the fucking, all the Russia stuff, the Steele dossier, all that shit. It scared people into the arms of the security state. So that's what I mean. So that's why that is exactly why I do actually kind of believe that these intelligence community guys did, in fact, definitely allowed January 6th to happen, definitely infiltrated these right-wing movements, and maybe were orchestrating the whole thing. Just not to say that there's not just plenty of random like right-wing Trump people that just really loved the game show guy and wanted him to continue to be president. Like, that's what they were counting on. They were counting on the fact that there was many people just naturally involved in this movement because it gives cover to the people that have infiltrated it and are using it to for their own ends, right? Scared people into the arms of the security state. What does that remind me of? That's the playbook every single time. With all this Red Scare shit and with all the stuff that was their whole anti-communist strategy in the third world that we were talking about earlier in the stream, in Indonesia and all these other places. It's getting people so scared that they'll accept this huge national security state and they'll accept the military rulers to step in and be like, we're going to keep you safe from the bad guys. The leader of the Proud Boys was literally an FBI asset and has been since 2012. Not just like all these guys. Fucking Adam Waffen and the base, all these neo-Nazi groups, they're all fucking infested with feds. Do you think the Red Scare stuff is harder to pull off because of the internet? Honestly, I might maybe one day thought that shit, but look at the way the discourse has shifted with China in the last year, even among people on the left, and tell me that the Red Scare shit doesn't still totally work. Who was doing the China bad stuff? Who was talking about that 2 years ago even? And then from Hong Kong, as soon as the Hong Kong protests started, to COVID, to today, now you've got a big segment of the left being like, oh yeah, China's authoritarian, China's bad. America makes mistakes and I'm a communist and I'm on the left, but we've got to be careful for this devious Chinese threat. How many people go on here on Twitch every single day, leftists, and talk about this shit? You don't think this Red Scare stuff still works? It absolutely still works. That's what makes it tough for me, because a lot of the voices I otherwise like engage in anti-communist shit. Yeah, I know Sean Meat, and me too, and I'm friends with some of these people. You know? I'm at least friendly with them, but it's like, I wish more people would see the fucking danger of this. And see the way that they've been manipulated to spread this kind of stuff. Just got here. Are we in a Cold War with China right now? Absolutely. Of course we are. But we're just in the very early stages of it. It's going to escalate a lot more. Over this decade, everything's on the line this decade, folks. Everything. This is the decade that China's going to become the number one global economy. You think that they're just going to let that happen? There's a new pink tide happening in Latin America. Do we think that's just going to be allowed to progress like that? So this is why I wanted to talk about this Tucker Carlson thing. And again, I don't like Tucker Carlson. I'm not a Tucker Carlson defender, but I also see a number of people immediately discounting what he said, and perhaps that's the whole fucking reason for it. Because what he said, I actually think this is one of those times where there's some nuggets of truth mixed into the right-wing conspiracies that he spouts every night. So let's take a look at this. Because look, now you have CNN talking about it. Talking about, oh, can you believe this? Can you believe what he said about this? I'm trying to see if I can just find the clip. Tucker Carlson, FBI. It's probably on Twitter. So let's see this. And again, please, I'm going to say this one more time. I don't like Tucker Carlson. Okay? Tucker Carlson's dangerous. He's a fascist. This is not I'm not in part of the Tucker Carlson Defense Force. I'm not. But I do want to take a look at what he said here and see if we can glean what is true about this statement and what is false. The deep state scrubbed it from YouTube. Just like my footage of the 6th. Don Cherry, also a fascist. That's correct. That's correct. Because again, look at the reaction. So Tucker Carlson talks about this, and then immediately you have CNN being like, can you believe this guy? And immediately everyone's like, oh, fuck Tucker Carlson. Now he's saying that this was organized by the FBI. And people are immediately just like, I can't believe you would say that. You don't think maybe there's a connection there? Let's take a look at this clip.
Well, there's been an enormous amount of hyperventilating in Washington over a segment we did 2 nights ago in which we pointed out that there were pretty clearly a number of people in the crowd at the Capitol on January 6th who had been in previous contact with the FBI about what was going to happen that day. Some of them may have encouraged others at the scene to commit crimes. Now, if that happened, and we believe it did happen, it would not be out of character for the FBI. They've done things very much like that before. That is beyond dispute. But in this case, they are disputing it. Not the FBI directly, they haven't said a word, but the obedient minions of the national security state who run the social media accounts of the New York Times and occupy the anchor desks at CNN. They became hysterical when we mentioned it. You can't say that, they screamed. That's not allowed. The geniuses at Twitter weighed in to inform us that the people we had described as agents of the FBI were in fact just FBI informants. So shut up. Hilarious. But we won't shut up, and we shouldn't. It could not be more obvious at this point that the government is in fact hiding something, probably quite a few things. So best to abandon...
Folks, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I kind of believe this. That doesn't mean I agree with Tucker Carlson. I don't. Tucker Carlson bad, okay? No one take me out of context. Tucker Carlson bad. I agree. In the theory that he's advancing, I think there is merit to this. The worst guy you know just made an excellent point. He's conflating informants with agents, though. Kind of penny, but like, I think when you understand the way these intelligence guys operate, often there's very little distinction. You know, if they flip someone, then they're using them to achieve their own ends. And like we talked about this in the 60s with Indonesia. There's always a degree of separation. There's always a degree of plausible deniability. That's the big thing about the feds, right? There's no paper, there's no memo, there's no emails, there's nothing that can connect anyone in the FBI to actually organizing this thing. But if there's enough connections in terms of informants, well, then you have to start to wonder, like, how much influence are these intelligence community guys? How much are they influencing these things? Because this is how they operate. There's a huge difference between agents and informants, but they can still use informants to carry out their own ends. And if there are informants within these organizations or within these movements, I don't think it's a huge stretch to say that there are agents as well. Or that some of these people who claim to be informants are lying and are agents. That's the thing, we don't know. I wouldn't put any support behind Tucker in any regard. This is useful in that it's making some right-wingers anti-FBI, and that's fine. Let them continue, and hopefully it impacts right-wing politicians. I suppose that's possible, King Uendo, but I think the key is in what he's saying here. The key in what he's saying here is that now you see the libs getting really crazy and being like, no, you can't talk about the connection with the FBI on January 6th. That's preposterous. Because he's saying it, it makes them not believe it. Who benefits from the liberals and these big media establishments immediately discounting any connection, any claim that the FBI is connected to this? You know what I mean? It's like he's taking a nugget of truth, mixing it in with his bizarre right-wing conspiracy theories that he advances every night, and it has this effect of turning people away and making them immediately reject this idea that they were connected. You know what I mean? Like what he's doing right now is not even anti-FBI. It's pro-FBI, because if Tucker Carlson is anti-FBI, then the FBI must be good. If Tucker Carlson is saying the FBI is bad, then we should listen to the FBI, because obviously if he's saying they're bad, then they must be pretty good. You know what I mean? That's the trick that I think is happening here. That's the and Alex Jones is another character that engages in this kind of stuff as well. That's disinformation, or like that's how propaganda can function. Black propaganda. I wouldn't give Tucker Carlson an ounce of credit. I wouldn't give any media establishment person credit, because they're saying a tiny piece of truth and distorting it, everything around it for their own gain. It's for his own gain, absolutely. But I do think that it is having an effect. What he's describing about how CNN and all these liberal...
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Claydonius, for the 6 months of Tier 1. Thank you. I do think it's having kind of an effect, though. It's like a double bluff. I'm going to watch the end of this clip. And please, again, everybody, please, understand, I don't like Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson's a fascist, okay? I agree. But I think he might be actually, in this case, ironically, even though he's taking this anti-FBI stance, I think he's kind of like helping the intelligence community narrative by doing this. That's kind of what I think is happening here. Like, I don't think he seriously is personally anti-FBI himself. I think by using his role as this kind of right-wing muckraker, he's like engaging in kind of disinformation. He's engaging in a psyop, essentially, or he's a part of a psyop to ensure that liberals who hate Fox News and hate Tucker Carlson, he's ensuring that they do not believe that there's any question, that there's any connection between the intelligence community and this January 6th riot. And now if someone comes along and says, you know what, I think there's a possibility that the FBI was involved in this Capital 6 riot, and then what are you going to have? You're going to have people being like, you sound exactly like Tucker Carlson. You sound like one of these right-wing psychos. That's the game I think that's being played here. That's the psyop that I think is kind of being waged here. So please, I'm not Tucker bad, okay? No one get the wrong idea about this, please. Let's just watch the rest of this clip.
Theatrics and find out what they are hiding. That's our job. To many in corporate media who claim that we are spreading Russian disinformation, instead, please calmly answer these 3 questions. First, how many of the so-called insurrectionists on January 6th had a relationship with the FBI? How many of these FBI moles encouraged others that day to break the law at the Capitol? We haven't heard anyone answer these questions or even address them. If the answer is none, if none of the protesters were secretly working with the FBI that day, then we were wrong.
This is interesting. Who was that just said that? Penny. Tucker Carlson and Anderson Cooper were both interviewed to work for the CIA when they were younger. Do you have a source on that? I've never heard that. Although we know Anderson Cooper is a guy that has strong connections to like the wealthiest people, the wealthiest, most powerful people in the country, as does Carlson when he married into this situation. Yeah. Tucker Carlson has CIA pedigree 100%. Let's see if we can find this, because this is kind of what I'm saying. Ironically, the game here is that he's advancing this anti-FBI stance, but I kind of think that he's doing it in order to benefit these exact people, the intelligence community. He probably has handlers. This guy's the most watched cable news host in America. As much as Tucker Carlson talks about like elites and media elites and stuff, he's the ultimate media elite. He's got the #1 watched news show. You don't think the fucking feds have fingerprints on that? You don't think they talk to him? You don't think they talk to his producers? Here's one by Affably Trill. Okay, I'm going to just watch the end of this clip and then we'll explore this a bit more, okay? Where did it go now? Oh boy, don't look at my emails. Here still, okay.
And we will apologize for it sincerely. We'll admit it immediately. But if the answer is not none, and we're pretty sure it isn't none, then people who claim otherwise are liars and hacks and should leave the public stage immediately because they have betrayed their readers and viewers. 2, if the Justice Department knew there were going to be protesters massing at the Capitol that day, and it's clear they did know, then why didn't they do anything to stop the riot? Why did police at the Capitol allow protesters to walk in, as video shows that they did?
This is true.
That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
What's going on here? Why is no one asking that question? 3rd and finally, why can't we see the tape for ourselves? The government is hiding more than 14,000 hours of video surveillance tape that shows exactly what did happen at the Capitol that day. Why are they hiding that?
Where's my footage on YouTube?
News organizations demanding to see it. You'd hate to think that NBC News, for example, or Vox, or The Atlantic, or The Washington Post, or The Daily Beast, or The New York Times, or any of them, are in fact working to protect the regime at the expense of the public. But unfortunately, we are starting to conclude that. Please prove us wrong.
Yeah, real problem, insane solution. That's right. Hey, Mersey, what's up? So Affably Trill, here's the quote. Carlson applied to the CIA, but his application was denied, so he turned to journalism. You should consider journalism, his father told him. They'll take anybody, and they did. The old he applied, but he didn't get in trick The old he just applied, but he was a washout. He didn't make it. And I just did the exact face that Tucker's doing. He applied, but he didn't make it. Interesting. Is he a reject, though? This is kind of what I'm wondering. Kind of like private citizen Alan Dulles. Hey, remember that Scorsese movie, The Departed? What's Leonardo DiCaprio's whole backstory in The Departed, his cover story? I'm not a cop. I applied to be the cop, and I got washed out. They let me go. I didn't have it in. I didn't have what it takes. So yeah, he applied for the CIA. He didn't make it, but now he's the number one most watched news program in all of the United States. And Anderson Cooper, intern for the CIA. Yeah, literally a Vanderbilt, one of the most wealthy, powerful people in the country. Wow, he interned at the CIA. After enrolling at Yale University, Cooper noticed a flyer hanging in the school's career counseling office inviting students to explore their options with the CIA. He decided to spend his summers interning at the headquarters of the agency in Langley, Virginia. Cooper called the work pretty bureaucratic and mundane and decided not to pursue intelligence work as a profession. I'm sure he didn't. And what do they say in JFK? If you watch JFK, that's like what they say in the movie too. Yale is a huge red flag, big time. And what do they say? They're like, once you're in the CIA, you're never out. You're in for life. And so now, to test my theory here, now here's how CNN, also with strong connections to the intelligence community, here's how they responded to this Tucker Carlson conspiracy. And again, what we're going to see here is can you believe that this lunatic said that the FBI was involved? How many boomer parents are watching CNN or MSNBC or whoever else covered this, saying can you believe that this fucking lunatic Tucker Carlson said that the FBI was involved in planning and carrying out the Capital Riot? I can't believe that anyone would ever say that. It's disgusting. It's Russian propaganda. Who benefits from that? You might argue that the FBI does benefit from that. Let's watch this clip.
Fox propaganda network's Tucker Carlson pushing a conspiracy with no legitimate proof that the FBI organized the January 6th Capitol attack. And the claim is already being picked up by some GOP lawmakers. Here's CNN's chief media correspondent, Brian Stelter.
When you assume, you make an ass of you and me.
Tucker's making a huge leap from the FBI knowing that some extremists anticipated something crazy for January 6th and the FBI directing the riot overall. Well, Redmond, I think that's one of the things that I was talking about, though, which is that if we do know that there was informants of the FBI that had infiltrated these movements, if we do know that the FBI or whatever intelligence community was at least partially behind the whole QAnon phenomenon, which was a central part of the January 6th thing, if we know that there's this tentative involvement, that's the thing, is we don't really know how much there was. I don't think it is that much of a leap. I don't think it is that much of a leap to think that they were involved in the planning of it. But even if not, again, this is how these intelligence guys operate. This is how they operate. There's always a degree of separation. So yeah, they knew that Trump was riling up his fan base to do something crazy on the 6th. They knew this. They didn't need to organize that much because there was plenty of people that were just doing this on their own. I agree with that. There was many of these Trump loving lunatics that were just they're stealing the election, so we got to go and do this riot because Trump's telling us to. That's the main thing. So of course, many of the people that were organizing it were doing so of their own volition. But what we need to unpack, though, is, did the FBI know that this was going to go on? Of course. They were talking about it openly. They were talking about it openly online prior to this event. We're going to storm the Capitol. We're going to do all this stuff. They were talking about it on their message boards. Of course they knew. So if they knew this, why were they allowed to breach the Capitol? Listen, there is a 0% chance that they would have breached the Capitol building unless they were allowed to. 0%. Not 1% or 5% or 7% or 15%. 0%. If they didn't want them to breach the Capitol, they wouldn't have done it. So that's the thing. It's like, you don't really need to organize it. When you create the exact circumstance for these things to happen, and then you allow these things to play out, and then you benefit from them, that's how these intelligence guys operate. Again, always a degree of separation. So maybe they weren't planning it. But whether they were planning it or not doesn't really matter. They knew what was happening. They knew what was about to happen. They allowed it to happen. And then they benefited from it. That's how these intelligence operations work. That's how these psyops work. Do you think they knew it would fail and allowed it to happen anyway? Yeah, I think that's kind of it. I think they wanted to get it to a certain level. They wanted the Capitol to be breached. They wanted to create this big explosive media situation without having too much collateral damage. And that's what happened. And then as soon as they had their story, then they cleared the Capitol. Trump gets kicked off all these social media platforms. They marginalize him. They get a nice couple of $1 billion in funding from the US government. That's what I mean. They don't really need to plan it. They don't need to plan these things. All they need to do is create the conditions necessary for these explosive events to happen. And then they benefit from it. It could never succeed. It's not like squatting in Congress makes you suddenly the new leader of the country. No, but if they murdered a bunch of lawmakers, that would have been like a pretty serious escalation, right? Which I don't doubt that there was people in the crowd that did want to do that. That did have the intention of wanting to hang Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi and all this shit. Yeah, I don't think there was ever a possibility that this coup could take place. No, because in order to have a coup, you need the military on your side. And Trump didn't quite have the same level of internal support. He's got a lot of support, like ICE. ICE is all Trump guys. There's plenty of like pro-Trump components in these police departments and military establishment. But I think in terms of the people running the show, the deep state, they were still opposed to Trump. Trump created the conditions. Well, yeah, I agree. Again, Redmond, I agree. Trump was the one, and I covered this. I covered this that day. I covered the Capital Riot on this stream. I talked about it plenty in the weeks leading up to it. I was pointing out when Trump was going on doing these speeches, being like, they're still in the election. Folks, they're stealing the election. We can't let them steal the election. I was saying, like, this is going to lead to some crazy violence because there's people that really believe this. And like I was saying, they were all talking about January 6th and we're going to go and storm the Capitol. They were literally openly planning it online. So we knew that. But again, if a lot of that online stuff was coming from this QAnon community, which there are many, many links to the intelligence community. So yeah, Trump is creating that situation, but there's the intelligence community throwing kindling on the fire at the same time. And there's the fact that the riot was allowed to breach the Capitol. That was 100% intentional. You cannot argue that. Let's I want to see this FBI thing. And again, Red Scary nailed it before too. I keep losing your comments. There's a way to look at them all in order, and I just don't know how to do it because I'm an idiot. Was Trump improvising? Did he have a real plan, or was he just hoping that the dominoes would fall in his favor, such as delay in certification, allowing more challenges to go forward? I'm not sure to what extent Trump was like aware of what was going to happen. I sometimes think he's just like saying stuff. I think because Trump was one of these right-wing conspiracy guys himself, right? Like that's kind of the weird thing about him as a character, is that I think he believed a lot of the crazy right-wing conspiracy theories. So I think he did somehow believe that if this count was interrupted, or that Mike Pence somehow had the power to like overturn the election, I think on a certain level he believed that, or he convinced himself of that. It was a jazz piece. It's a good way of pointing it out, Brock Tragan. It is. It's like they have a basic idea of what's going to happen, and we're going to allow this to escalate to a certain level, and then we're going to shut it down. We're going to take Trump off the board. We're going to get a nice big fat $1 billion contract from the government to beef up security, which as we know, if they had wanted to have a completely militarized security around the U.S. Capitol that day, when they 100% knew exactly everything that was going to happen, they would have. You know? Yeah, he believed anything that got big reactions at rallies. That's right.
This is some guy, Rob Russo,
Oh,
some
boy.
leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
I should play the JFK music for this. Majority Report Raiders, get in. Bring it on in here. Welcome. We're talking about some wild shit. I almost am like leery about how do I catch up to Majority Report Raiders with the wild shit. We've been unpacking some crazy conspiracy shit. Switch to normie shit. Yeah, we're just talking about like incrementalism. No conspiracy theorists around here whatsoever. We're talking about how we like to vote and do incremental policies to enact social democracy in the United States and Canada, and how that's the only way forward. That's the only way that we're going to progress forward into a positive future. We're just talking about watching CNN. That's right. Oh man, does someone have the link? Someone posted a link, I think a tweet, about how they're going to start targeting these kind of like anarchists and left-wing movements now, probably with their nice new funding that they're getting from this Capitol Security Bill. Okay, Red Scary, that's a good summary. This is what we're talking about. We're asking questions about deep state involvement in January 6th. We saw Tucker Carlson had raised this conspiracy theory on his show, and it provoked a very strong reaction from CNN, for instance. And we're kind of asking ourselves not to agree with Tucker Carlson, which we don't. Let me just clarify this. Once I've clarified this a number of times, we're trying to explore the possible links between the FBI and this January 6th riot in a way that we're not doing it to defend Trump. We're not doing that. Orange Man bad. I agree. The Orange Man was indeed bad. But the question is, what level of involvement did the FBI have? We do not endorse Tucker Carlson. No. The question is, what level of involvement did the FBI have with this January 6th event? And the central question to this, which is, I think, impossible to argue with, folks, is, was this Capitol riot allowed to breach the Capitol, and for what reason? And I think the answer is yes, it was allowed to. This is, I think, the thing that we can say unequivocally about the January 6th riot, is that if they had wanted to ensure that they didn't breach the Capitol building, they would have. You know, they've got a whole fucking army in DC. They could have very, very easily prevented the Capitol from being breached. They didn't. This riot was allowed to breach the Capitol. The question is, why was this allowed to happen? This is kind of what we're wondering. And Tucker Carlson is kind of proposing this conspiracy that the FBI was involved. And without agreeing with Tucker Carlson, the point that I'm trying to make about this is that So it was kind of a false flag operation. Yeah, I believe that it was. And what I think law enforcement is MAGA, Aaron. A lot of that is true. There's a lot of these right-wing guys in the police institutions and in the police unions and in the military and ICE and a lot of these institutions. But the main guys pulling the strings, the deep state, the intelligence community guys, they were always kind of at war with Trump. Not to say Trump was good. I must continue to clarify this. So what I'm noticing about this reaction is when Tucker Carlson points this out, Tucker Carlson, who is bad, who I do not agree with, who is, promotes these very racist conspiracy theories on his television show. But you'll notice that when he proposes this conspiracy theory, he provokes this very strong reaction, which we're seeing on CNN. They do a whole segment about how dare Tucker Carlson suggest that the FBI had anything to do with January 6th. And then all of our boomer grandparents that watch CNN, that watch MSNBC, their takeaway from that is, that Tucker Carlson was suggesting there's an FBI connection to the January 6th riot. We all know that that's not true. They would never do that. They would never be involved in that. So, and you see in the way that Tucker Carlson is using his position as this widely viewed and widely despised right-wing commentator is kind of through weird trickery advancing actually a pro-FBI narrative, even though what he's ostensibly saying, the FBI is bad, the FBI was involved. It provokes this counter-narrative in liberal media and in the liberal establishment where they're like, oh, no, the FBI would never do that. The FBI is good. So this is what I'm trying to point out, okay? Not that Tucker Carlson is good, but that Tucker Carlson, who, when he was younger, applied to work for the CIA and was apparently rejected, which could be a cover story. What I think he's doing is acting as kind of a cog in a psyop to make sure that the people that watch these mainstream liberal media establishment organizations like CNN, like MSNBC, to ensure that these people do not believe that there's any connection whatsoever between the FBI, the intelligence community, and this January 6th riot. And then anyone that suggests that is like a right-wing lunatic like Tucker Carlson. This is what I believe is the psyop that's being perpetrated on us here. Because I do think that the FBI was involved. What level of involvement was there? Well, that's what we don't know. Maybe we'll never know. But were they allowed to breach the Capitol? Was this riot allowed to breach the Capitol? Yes. Yes, they were. Absolutely. The question is why and to what end? What I suggest is that, because Donald Trump, of course, he was always oriented himself against the intelligence community. And he would always talk about the deep state and rant about the deep state, right? And the reason for that is not because he was against what they were doing. Like when he was president, he was carrying out all the bombings and all the assassinations. He was doing everything that they wanted. But what he was doing, if you look at the role of the United States president as being the smiling, friendly face, the PR man at the front of this like vicious empire, Trump was like an embarrassment to them. He embarrassed them. He openly talked about how evil they were and was like, yeah, we're evil and it's actually good that we're evil. We need to go take the oil. He was saying what we would always say about Trump. He's saying the quiet part out loud. And that's why I think the people that make up the intelligence community establishment, that's why they didn't like him. Not because he was like opposed to them ideologically, but because he was like such a fucking boorish dunce that he like would openly talk about what their plans were. And America, the role of the American president is supposed to present that like smiling face at the head of this empire that makes it benign, that makes it like, oh, we're the good guys. And when Trump's the president, you can't have that act anymore. Everyone knows you're not the good guys. Yeah, okay, so Redmond, this is what I'm saying. If that was the FBI's plan, it's backfiring because the FBI is now being blamed. That's what I'm saying is not accurate, though. We're talking about the liberals. The liberals love the FBI and security more than ever now. That's the point. There's maybe some right-wing cranks that believe in these deep state conspiracy theories, but they can control those people because they've infiltrated all the right-wing crank movements in the first place. They've infiltrated this whole QAnon thing. They probably originated the whole QAnon thing. So they don't mind if there's right-wing cranks that are out there that think the FBI is bad and believe these conspiracy theories, because then you can shunt those people off to conspiracy theory land, where you watch like Alex Jones, you watch these like conspiracy theorist weirdos, and you get kind of put into this box, and you don't really have any power. You don't really present any actual opposition to them. But what you do have now is you've got CNN running stories about like, how dare Tucker Carlson say that the FBI was involved with this, and then you have this big audience, all the audience that's watching CNN, being like, yeah, we got to trust the FBI. Look at Tucker Carlson; he's saying that the FBI is bad. Can you believe that? They're good. That's the game that's happening right now, in my opinion. Redmond, you're asking some actually very controversial questions there, Redmond, which I've actually already discussed on this stream before you showed up. And not to get into that, not to pull at those threads again, but if we're talking about some of these incidents, such as the January 6th riot, was that allowed to happen? Did they 100% know it was going to happen, and did they allow it to happen? Yes. In my opinion, you can make that same kind of argument about September 11th. Did they know it was about to happen? Yes. Was it allowed to happen? I would say yes. Did they benefit from it? Absolutely. They created a 20-year war on terror, unlimited blank check from the United States government for the defense companies, new wars, big new federal bureaucracy. Of course they benefited from it. Ask yourself, who benefits? That's what you always have to ask yourself. Who benefits? Man, I'm really bad at getting raids from big channels and then immediately saying the most alienating shit possible. I really got to be better at this. At the same time, it's hard because I'm right in the middle of talking about this shit. And it's like, I'm imagining myself like in a room with a bunch of like-minded people, this like sweaty, smoke-filled room talking about these crazy conspiracy theories. And all of a sudden just like 150 people just like wander in from elsewhere, just being like, hey, what's happening in here? And you have to kind of be like, I don't know, not much.
You can count on me and have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Weenus, thanks for gifting a sub to Red Jam. Thank you. Why do we have to hold people's hands? Well, no, I don't want to be alienated.
Computer to mark up the size of the account.
Why don't you talk about controlled demolitions and dancing Mossad agents? Oh boy. Well, that's when I want to talk about this stuff. I believe in this stuff. I enjoy talking about it. I think it's important to talk about it. At the same time, I do try and make an effort to be like welcoming to people that have different views, that maybe are not quite as far along on this road as some of us are. I try to create an environment where people feel comfortable when they join the channel. And thank you, Affably Trill, by the way. Thank you for the 100 Ren coin. So this is my take though on the Tucker Carlson conspiracy theory that the FBI was involved in the January 6th riot. There's a lot of I don't like Tucker Carlson. I don't. I do not like him. That being said, in this particular instance, there's a lot of truth mixed in with the right-wing conspiracies that he's advancing. And what I think we should do is take those nuggets of truth and explore that, and explore the things that he said that do make sense, while not taking it in this racist right-wing extremist direction, which is what he does a lot. Believe it or not, the conspiracy theory is the lighthearted topic on this channel. Usually we're talking about sick US-backed genocides. We do talk a lot about that. Okay, so let's watch this CNN clip. And once again, folks, I'm thinking about these kind of clips from CNN as the point. That is the point of that Tucker Carlson segment. Okay? He's trying to provoke, deliberately, in my opinion, trying to provoke segments just like this, and who benefits from that? Who benefits? The intelligence guys that were connected to this incident. That's who benefits. This stuff reminds me of Nixon was framed angle of Watergate. There's something there for sure. Absolutely. It's the same thing. Yeah. Same, very similar situation. We gotta neutralize this guy. He's too much of a loose cannon. We gotta neutralize this guy. We're gonna give the people a couple years of Jimmy Carter to think things are getting better. Then we're gonna sabotage Jimmy Carter, which they did with the Iran hostage crisis. They deliberately sabotaged Carter's presidential campaign to get Reagan in there, and then off to the races. Once Reagan's in there, they basically, if you look at, that's what Watergate, I think that's the kind of conspiracy theory there, is that Watergate was basically a coup to put someone like Reagan in charge, with a couple of little steps thrown in there along the way. The punch-drunk pulpit, this is exactly what I'm saying. Whether they perpetuated the riot or not, Capitol Police still had warnings that January 6th would be bad, but they ignored those warnings. This is what we were saying before. These January 6th types, the QAnon people, like the Donald Forum, they were all on Parler. They were all openly talking about this. We're going to storm the Capitol. Like this, it was not a secret. They knew this was going to happen. They 100% knew it was going to happen. And I'll say it one more time. If they didn't want people breaching the Capitol, they wouldn't have done it. Again, if there had been Black Lives Matter protesters around the Capitol openly planning online to storm the Capitol, you think there wouldn't have been a fucking military presence surrounding the Capitol that day? Of course. They allowed this thing to progress to the level that it did, and they allowed them inside the Capitol building. I've advanced my theory as to why. Maybe it's something different. But that we can agree on. I think we should all agree on that. They knew it was going to happen. They allowed it to progress to that level. They allowed them into the Capitol building. We might disagree about to what end, but I think we should be able to agree on that. There would have been a massacre of BLM protesters. Can you just imagine Brock Dragon. Imagine a bunch of like let's say I, Rob Rousseau, was going online prior to Canada Day, and organizing a big, this is a hypothetical thought experiment, to be 100% clear to anyone that's watching this. But like, go online and I'm like, we're going to organize a big protest that we're going to storm the fucking Canadian Parliament building, and we're going to take hostages, and we're going to do all this crazy stuff, and we're going to overthrow the government to give land back to Indigenous people. And I created let's just say I did that. Let's say I created a big protest movement. We're openly talking about this online. We're openly going online and saying, we're storming the Parliament building. We're going to overthrow the Canadian government. We're going to give the land back to Indigenous people. Do you think, or let's say in the American version, doing it at the US Capitol, do you think, with all of this out there, all this information out there, all these people openly talking about this, that we then show up to the Canadian Parliament, to the US Capitol, we show up and we're allowed to actually fucking get in there? Does anyone think that would be a possibility? Of course not. Of course not. Because they would be like, damn, there's people online saying that they're going to overthrow the government. They're being very clear about this. So we're going to put a fucking military presence in front of the building to ensure that this doesn't happen. And we're going to shoot anyone that tries to get into the building. That's what would be the result. It's not the last Rob stream, because I'm just proposing a what-if scenario. Again, it's a hypothetical thought experiment to just point out the absurdity of the fact that this January 6th riot was allowed to progress the way it was. No one should have under the illusions that this would have been allowed to progress to that point if it was anyone else doing it. And it certainly wouldn't have been allowed to progress to the point where they actually breached the Capitol. The only way, I'm sorry, but the only way that happens is if they let them in the front door. Okay, so I think we can all agree on that. And I'm not advocating that anyone do any of that stuff. Allowed by whom? The intelligence community. The FBI. That's the nugget of truth in what Tucker Carlson's saying. And if you go back at similar false flag incidents that we've seen throughout U.S. history, there's often these same coincidences. Why was this allowed to happen? Where were the cops? Where was the security? Why did this happen? Well, the reason is because it was allowed to happen. And I 100% do believe that this was allowed to happen. And my point about Tucker Carlson is that Tucker Carlson, with his segment, with his open conspiracy theorizing about this, he's provoking segments like this one that we're watching on CNN, which has the downstream effect of getting people to want to support and believe and fund the intelligence community, the FBI. So let's continue watching the CNN clip. And again, watch this clip with the understanding that that's why Tucker Carlson this is the reaction that they're hoping for. And all of our liberal boomer parents and grandparents are watching this being like, yeah, the FBI is great. That is deliberate.
Tucker Carlson must have forgotten this lesson from The Odd Couple, because his latest January 6th conspiracy theory makes huge assumptions in a baseless bid to let rioters off the hook.
But strangely, some of the key people who participated on January 6th have not been charged.
It's not strange at all. Prosecutors are still building their cases. But Carlson is claiming, without any proof, that the people given anonymity in court papers, the people called unindicted co-conspirators, were actually government agitators, there to stoke a riot.
The government knows who they are, but the government has not charged them. Why is that? You know why. They were almost certainly working for the FBI. So FBI operatives were organizing the attack on the Capitol.
This is all a psyop. This is my point. All of this. Think about the ways that, right, with what is happening right now, you have Fox News and Tucker Carlson working hand in hand with CNN to advance a psyop on people that has different effects depending on what the audience is. When have agents provocateurs ever done that sort of thing? This is very common. And again, you have a number, I don't discount this. The majority of the people that were there that day were there of their own volition. They're not FBI agents. They're random right-wing lunatics that love the game show president and think that the Democratic Party is evil and satanic and are stealing the election. And that's why they're there. It's not like like it's completely orchestrated, but there's people in that crowd that are informants, or I believe probably do have stronger connections to the intelligence community. And they kind of like, again, it's just throwing kindling. It's throwing kindling, and they let them into the Capitol building. They let it escalate to a certain extent, and then they shut it down. They neutralized Trump, who they didn't like because he was an asshole. He's a dumb asshole who was constantly embarrassing them. And they get sympathy from the libs. They get a nice big funding package. Who benefits from that? The same people that always benefit. The national security state, the intelligence community. That's the deep state. They're the ones that run the United States government. It's not the president. So that's my point about this Tucker Carlson thing. if we think about this as all one big psyop. Just like CNN and Fox News, just like the Republicans and the Democrats. It's like a controlled opposition. It's wrestling. It's kayfabe. They're doing a game. They're actually working together. We watch this and we think that they're against one another. They're calling it the Fox propaganda host. They're going back and forth. Really, they're on the same scene. They're on the same side. Think about it like a wrestling match. They're kicking the shit out of each other in the ring. They're screaming at each other. They go backstage and they're having beers together. It's the same dynamic. It's good cop, bad cop. The Republicans and the Democrats. Fox News, CNN. It's the same game. Okay? This is how they operate. And underneath the deep state is the ultimate benefactor, capital. Good way of putting it. Schick. Good way of putting it. The house always wins. That's the house. It's Hart versus Austin, and they're switching heel versus face depending on the crowd. It's true. Oh boy. I had like a vague plan to talk about this. This is all I wrote in my note today. This is the only thing that I wrote down about this stream. January 6th, Tucker Carlson / Glenn. and that is all that I had planned to talk about. This has gone way far beyond what I was planning on talking about. It's actually why I really enjoy doing this stream, because you can kind of make these connections in real time, and it's easier for me to just sit here and talk in front of a camera and just kind of follow these thoughts wherever they want, or wherever they happen to go. If I were to sit down and like try and think of an article about this, I would find that more difficult. But when I'm just able to sit down and talk with you and interact with you, it allows this stuff to kind of progress naturally. It's kind of interesting. It's why I really enjoyed doing this stream. So let's continue the rest of this segment. But that's my point, though. This is all kayfabe. Yeah, Hat Rob is the most powerful Rob. Who knew? I put on the hat, and we really fucking went crazy today, didn't we? So let's watch the rest of this clip.
On January 6th,
Carlson is known for his logical leaps, but this is one of his most egregious ever.
this is crazy, and we should resist it.
And now Carlson has whipped up his allies into a frenzy. Woo! Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene assuming Carlson is right and saying we need names and answers about the FBI operatives who were involved. But this is just yet another baseless theory that Carlson has hyped to millions of people. The existence of unnamed, as yet uncharged co-conspirators does not mean that they were working undercover for the FBI. Just look at the size of the mob. This is a massive case.
The phrase unindicted co-conspirator
This is the trick.
cannot refer.
Look at all these people. What Tucker Carlson saying all these people are FBI? Of course not. Of course they're not all FBI. Of course not. Much of that is organic. Many of these people are they wanted the fucking game show guy to continue to be president. He was telling them that the election was stolen, and that's what they thought that they were doing. That's not the point. It's, were they allowed to get to the point that they did? Were they allowed to breach the Capitol? Yes. I was exposing the deep state. That's right. That's the game, though. Look at this big crowd. Of course there's a big crowd. Yeah, it's because the super popular Trump, who is insanely popular in the conservative movement and has these legions of devoted fans, he's there telling them every day that they're stealing the election and you got to show up on January 6th to take the country back. which they openly talked about doing. That's not the point. The people there are not the point. Like they're there naturally. You don't need the FBI organizing that because that's happening on its own. They knew it was happening. And if they knew it was happening, which we all did, even fucking dumbasses like me, we all knew it was happening. So why were they allowed to breach the Capitol then if they knew it was happening? That's the central question to this.
To an FBI agent acting as an undercover, or to anybody acting on behalf of the FBI, because under federal law, if a person is acting for the government, they're not actually part of a crime because they're essentially pretending.
But in Tucker world, conspiracy beats reality. Just look at his banner on screen asking what really happened on January 6th, as if it's some sort of mystery. And his guest,
of a prior relationship with the federal government.
Darren Beatty, a former speechwriter for President Trump, attended a conference frequented by white nationalists. And when CNN...
Yeah, look at the Chiron. This is true. The Cinnamon Challenge, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This Chiron is nuts. Fox propaganda host Carlson promotes insane conspiracy that FBI planned January 6th Capitol attack. Again, it's like taking that nugget of truth, you turn it up to 11, and then it goes into crazy conspiracy land. That's how all of these things end up happening. The JFK conspiracy, the UFO shit, 9/11. Everything gets pushed into this conspiracy zone intentionally. So that way, anyone that asks legitimate questions about this stuff ends up getting put in this camp, or people become too paranoid to ask questions about it because it's like, I don't want to be one of these crazy conspiracy guys. This happens intentionally. They've been pushing to make it fringe. That's right, yeah, and AOC, of course, because like there was lawmakers there, like AOC, for example, that I think were legitimately fucking terrified, as they probably should have been, because if they had been discovered by many of these people, something bad would have probably happened to them. So they were fucking rightfully pointing out like, why was this allowed to happen? But it has been they have been gone kind of silent on that too, isn't there? Haven't they?
He left the White House. But Tucker never mentioned any of that. Instead, he promoted Beatty's website, which posted a just asking questions sort of story, suggesting that the feds infiltrated militia groups who ransacked the Capitol.
That's true.
And it's part of a story that
That is true. The feds, as Stetler just said, 100% had infiltrated these militia groups. These right-wing militia groups are absolutely infested with federal agents and informants. 100%. I have to go apologize to my QAnon parents. They were right all along, but that's the thing. They're not right, because QAnon is ultimately what it's doing is it's obscuring the very real satanic trafficking and fucked up shit that these powerful people are doing. QAnon, if you think about what that is, it's doing that exact same phenomenon. It's taking anyone that asks questions about powerful people in the United States and they're like the fucked up shit they get up to, the weird rituals in the private schools that they all do, the connections they all have, the fucking connections they have to these like sex traffickers. This is all legitimate shit that we know about. And because QAnon exists, then when you start asking questions about that, you're like, oh, you're not one of those crazy fringe QAnon guys, right? That's what the game is. What you're suggesting that like powerful people in the United States do illegal sex trafficking and carrying out these fucked up rituals and stuff? Oh, you sound like one of these wacky conspiracy theorists. It's absolutely an op. Gabagool watcher. It is. Of course it is. And we traced QAnon goes back to Pizzagate. Who was spreading Pizzagate in the early days? Main person, Jack Posobiec, former naval intelligence. They've had their fingers in this Pizzagate QAnon stuff all along. And that doesn't mean that every single person that believes in it is connected to this conspiracy theory, but that's how they control people, though. Former naval intelligence, also part of Roger Stone's crew. Roger Stone, who I feel is probably a Fed as well. He's at the very least an informant. on the side that it started organically, but for sure could have been amplified or on purpose by intel agencies. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like at that point, it doesn't really matter where it started. It's, are they encouraging it? Are they adding kindling to that fire? Which they are. Let's continue with this segment here.
Has been telling ever since the night of January 6th.
It is not your fault. It is their fault.
And Brian Stelter joins me now, along with Chris Wecker, the former FBI Assistant Director for the Criminal Investigative Division.
Folks, who's the fucking guest on CNN right now that they're talking to this? Don't tell me. Did I just imagine that? Did I just imagine that? Is he talking to a fucking FBI guy about this? Is that his authority, his authority source that he's bringing on to break this down? An actual FBI agent? Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? Do you see what's happening here? Right? He's a former FBI agent, just like Tucker Carlson applied for the CIA, but wasn't cut out for it. Just like Anderson Cooper of CNN, one of the most powerful families in American history, also interned for the CIA, but he just interned. And then after, he had no involvement. With the FBI pin on the lapel. Give me a fucking break. Are you kidding me with this? Do you see what's happening here? Do you see the psyop? Do you see the kayfabe?
Thank you so much. And Brian Stelter joins me now, along with Chris Wecker, the former FBI Assistant Director for the Criminal Investigative Division. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Former
Brian, I appreciate
FBI Assistant Director
just before the break. As you mentioned,
of the Criminal Investigative
this whole
Division
comes from a site run by the former Trump White House speechwriter who left the White House after he attended a conference attended by white nationalists. Does Tucker really take this guy seriously?
Well, in a word, yes. This is how the right-wing media world works. Starts on a fringe website, gets onto Tucker's show, then it spreads all throughout the GOP, and that's what's happened in the last 24 hours. In the MAGA echo chamber, the idea is that brave patriots were entrapped by the feds, were tricked.
I just assumed the CIA was behind everything. I guess I know a lot less about the FBI. Well, the simple distinction there is the CIA is the international division of the intelligence community, and the FBI is the domestic division. But they're on the same, it's all part of the same intelligence apparatus. And another thing that I think happens, and I think this is an intentional part of their strategy, is you've got so many different competing ops going on. You've got so many different agencies not even talking to each other. Like, they don't even know who's an op and who's not an op sometimes. Like, I think it's like they've got so many people doing different things, juggling different things, that becomes part of their whole strategy. But that's what I mean. It's just the domestic arm of the intelligence community, and it's the international arm. But you just envision that as being part of the same intelligence community blob, basically. There was a story just the other day about an undercover DEA person shooting and killing another undercover officer who was buying from them. Yeah, and that's, again, going back to the whole 9/11 thing, that's part of how 9/11 was allowed to happen, is these intelligence communities that were doing two totally different investigations, not talking with each other. And then lo and behold, that's the end. That's the result.
Tricked or were pushed into starting a riot. No evidence at all. Lots of evidence to the contrary. But Tucker somehow seems to need to provide excuses for these rioters, to let them off the hook, to say they were innocent, brave patriots.
Chris, so give us the facts here. The whole premise of this is based on two unindicted co-conspirators. Can you please explain what that might mean? As Ellie Honig said.
And again, folks, look at this investigation. There are plenty of people being indicted for being involved with this. It's called being a patsy. They're the patsies. You always have to have one in these kind of false flag operations. Because that shows that we're taking this seriously. It shows that it developed organically. Look, we're throwing guys in jail. We had nothing to do with this.
in Brian's piece, it can't refer to the FBI.
No, by definition, in a conspiracy, you can't have a government agent as an unindicted co-conspirator. Don,
That's against the rules, you see.
Co-conspirators are.
Let's ask this guy from the FBI to explain how the FBI couldn't possibly have been involved in this. Oh, yeah, according to when there's a conspiracy, I guess it would be against the rules to do that. Are these fucking people serious? Are you kidding me with this?
Are people who cooperated after the fact. And that's how you, by the way, that's how you make conspiracy cases. They are, by definition, also one or more people agreeing to commit a crime and taking steps to commit that crime. So unindicted co-conspirators, I think what Tucker is reflecting is a fundamental misunderstanding of the criminal justice system. It's not the kind of thing you say if you want to be taken seriously.
Chris, we heard from Officer Michael Fanone earlier in the show. He was brutally attacked, like many officers who defended the Capitol. The right wing likes to champion law and order, but isn't indulging these sorts of conspiracies a slap in the face to law enforcement?
It is. I mean,
oh yeah, it is.
130 officers were assaulted that day, over 130. Many have been charged for those assaults. And I think if you asked any police officer in the country, they would come out strongly saying the same thing that I am. I mean, everything that happened that day was wrong.
Brian, let's talk a new edition of your book, Hoax, now out. It is new chapters detailing the rise of the big lie leading to the Capitol attack, even after.
And this guy's got a book about this.
To lie and say that it was actually Antifa, Black Lives.
This guy's got a book about this. Hoax. Donald Trump, Fox News, and the dangerous distortion of truth. Oh, that's Brian Stetler. Brian Stetler's book is about this. Okay, I see.
Chapters detailing the rise of the big lie leading to the Capitol attack. Even after the attack, some Republicans tried to lie and say that it was actually Antifa, Black Lives Matter, who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. What did you learn about where these lies come from?
Well, and that attempt started on the very night of the riot. That's why I went in Hoax and I went back to all the tapes and showed what the commentators were saying right after the attack. The Antifa craziness, all those conspiracy theories to divert blame, it started right away and it's continued to this day. And now here we are talking about Tucker promoting an inside job, false flag theory. It's all more of the same. And I think in some ways, Don, it is so insidious because they're presenting 7 or 8 different theories, none of which make sense.
That's part of the psyop. It was a false flag. It was. I'm sorry to tell all these fine gentlemen. It was absolutely a false flag.
But all of which provide excuses. I think in some ways it's because the insurrection was so shameful. It was so criminal. It was such an attack on our democracy that there has to be an excuse. Tucker has to present these alternative realities in order to let his viewers, I guess, sleep better at night, to be honest, Don.
And we've heard from law enforcement and from intelligence officials, Chris, that they're concerned that this could lead to more violence.
It could. I mean, Don, I'd like to think that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have actually penetrated these organizations and actually have informants in these organizations. I think they're behind in that area. It took us
behind my ass
8 years back in the 80s and early 90s to infiltrate these groups. It takes some time, but I don't think even today they have enough coverage other than just reading their social media.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.